Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Dialog 501. A young Mysorean asks, "How did I get this body?" Sri Bhagavan replied, "You speak of I and the body. There is the relationship between the two. You are not therefore the body. The question does not occur to the body because it is inert. There is an occasion when you are not aware of the body, namely in deep sleep. The question does not arise then. Nevertheless, you are there in sleep. To whom does this question arise now?" The disciple said, "The ego." Sri Bhagavan replied, "Yes, the body and the ego rise up together and sink together. There is an occasion when you are not associated with the ego in deep sleep. Now you are associated with the ego. Of these two states, which is your real state? You are present in sleep, and the same you are present now too. Why should the doubt arise now, and not then? You are right in saying that it is for the ego. You are not the ego. The ego is intermediate between the self and the body. You are the self. Find out the origin of the ego and see if the doubt persists." Sri Bhagavan added after a few minutes, "The answer, according to Shastras, will be that the body is due to karma. The question will be, how did karma arise? We must say, from a previous body, and so on without end. The direct method of attack is not to depend on invisible hypotheses, but to ask, whose karma is it, or whose body? Hence, I answered in this manner. This is more purposeful." How did you get the body? The question presupposes that embodiment is the real state. Is that so? In the question, there is mentioned the I and the body. How is the I defined? And who is it that knows of a body? Is that one the body? Sri Bhagavan commenced his answer saying, "You speak of I and the body. There is the relationship between the two. The body is the object, the I is the subject, apparently so. And there is a relation between the two. There is a relationship between the two, I and the body, hence the necessity to inquire, to know one's real nature, which is bodiless and free of I. There is a relationship between the two. You are not therefore the body. The question does not occur to the body because it is inert. The body does not know itself. Something else knows of it. What is that something else? There is an occasion when you are not aware of the body, namely in deep sleep. Though you are not aware of the body or anything pertaining to the body in deep sleep, you do exist, and there remains a bodiless knowledge of existence. The question does not arise then. The body, the idea of I, these do not appear in a deep sleep state. Nevertheless, you are there in sleep. You exist. Everything pertaining to the body is gone then, but existence remains undiminished. To whom does the question arise now? The question cannot arise for the body for reasons just stated. The question does not arise for the self, which is egoless and bodiless existence. So for whom does the question arise? The disciple replied, the ego. And Sri Bhagavan continued to explain, yes, the body and the ego rise up together and sink together. There is an occasion when you are not associated with the ego in deep sleep. Now you are associated with the ego. The body and the ego rise up together. And sink together. Does existence rise and sink? Now you are associated with the ego. In deep sleep you are not so associated. The body is inert. The self ever is and ever knows. Something between them arises as I, which is not real. Of these two states, which is your real state? One associated with the ego, or one not so associated? You are present in sleep, and the same you are present now too. Only that which is continuously present, regardless of the states of mind, is the self. What disappears in sleep? Everything perceived, everything objective. You are present always. What is the nature of that you? You are right in saying that it is for the ego. You are not the ego. The ego is intermediate between the self and the body, an illusion that seems to tie the two together. Who is it for? Not for the self, nor for the body, which is inert. Perhaps for itself, but that would be redundant. Find out the origin of the ego and see if the doubt persists. What is the origin of the ego? Where is it? If only you adhere totally to the identification of the self as your real nature, your real existence, all the doubts will cease to persist. The dialogue concluded with Sri Bhagavan saying, according to Shastras, the answer will be that the body is due to karma. The question will be, how did karma arise? And we must say, from a previous body, and so on without end. The direct method of attack is not to depend on invisible hypotheses, but to ask whose karma is it, or whose body? That returns you to non-objective inquiry. Whose karma is it? The actions and the results are not for you. Or whose body? The body does not belong to existence. Existence does not belong to the body. Hence I answered in this manner. This is more purposeful. For it's only by making your vision non-objective, truly inquiring, that you realize the self. Thoughts about karma and from where it arises and the results thereof and its relationship to the body or a previous body, none of that will bring about liberation. They are simply more ideas, or perhaps useful explanations for certain aspects of spiritual instruction. This is more purposeful. What is purposeful is that which takes you to the knowledge of the self directly. August 14th, 1938. SJT Rajendra Prasad and SJT Jnanalay Bajaj with others are on a visit to Sri Maharshi. On the 16th of August, SJT JB asked questions. How is the mind to be steadily kept aright? Sri Bhagavan answered, all living beings are aware of their surroundings, and therefore intellect must be surmised in all of them. At the same time, there is a difference between the intellect of man and that of other animals, because man not only sees the world as it is and acts accordingly, but also seeks fulfillment of desires. And is not satisfied with the existing state of affairs. In his attempt to fulfill his desires, he extends his vision far and wide, and yet he turns away dissatisfied. He now begins to think and reason. The desire for permanency of happiness and of peace bespeaks such permanency in his own nature. Therefore, he seeks to find and regain his own nature, that is, his self. That found, all is found. Such inward seeking is the path to be gained by man's intellect. The intellect itself realizes after continuous practice that it is enabled by some higher power to function. It cannot itself reach that power, so it ceases to function after a certain stage. When it thus ceases to function, the supreme power is still left there, all alone. That is realization. That is the finality. That is the goal. It is thus plain that the purpose of the intellect is to realize its own dependence upon the higher power, and its inability to reach the same. So it must annihilate itself before the goal is gained. The disciple said, a shloka is quoted which means, I do not desire kingdoms, etc. Only let me serve thee forever, and there lies my highest pleasure. Is that right? Sri Bhagavan replied, yes. There is room for kama, desire, so long as there is an object apart from the subject, that is, duality. There can be no desire if there is no object. The state of no desire is moksha. There is no duality in sleep and also no desire, whereas there is duality in the waking state and desire also is there. Because of duality, a desire arises for the acquisition of the object. That is the outgoing mind, which is the basis of duality and of desire. If one knows that bliss is none other than the self, the mind becomes inward turned. If the self is gained, all the desires are fulfilled. That is the apta kama atma kama akamascha, fulfillment of desire, of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. That is moksha. Here J.B. tried to make himself clear by saying that what he meant by sadbuddhi was not the same as buddhi. It means that which holds fast to the good, the right, and the chosen path. He wanted to know how such steadfastness could be gained. Sri Bhagavan replied, what is wanted for gaining the highest goal is loss of individuality. The intellect is coextensive with individuality. Loss of individuality can only be after the disappearance of buddhi, good or bad. The question therefore does not arise. The disciple said, but yet one must know the right thing, choose the right path, practice the right dharma, and hold fast to it. Otherwise he is lost. Sri Bhagavan answered, true strength accrues by keeping in the right direction without swerving from it. The disciple said, difficulties are met with. How is one to get the strength necessary to overcome the obstacles which beset one's path? Sri Bhagavan replied, by means of devotion and company of the sages. The disciple said, loss of individuality was just before mentioned as a prerequisite to moksha. Now devotion and association with the wise are advised as the methods. Is there not individuality implied in them? For example, in I am a bhakta, I am a satsangi. Sri Bhagavan replied, the method is pointed out to the seeker. The seeker has certainly not lost his individuality so far. Otherwise, the question would not have arisen. The way is shown to effect the loss of individuality of the seeker. It is thus appropriate. The disciple said, is the desire for Swaraj right? Sri Bhagavan replied, such desire no doubt begins with self-interest. Yet practical work for the goal gradually widens the outlook so that the individual becomes merged in the country. Such merging of the individuality is desirable, and the related karma is nishkama, unselfish. The disciple said, if Swaraj is gained after a long struggle, and terrible sacrifices, is not the person justified in being pleased with the result and elated by it? Sri Bhagavan replied, he must have in the course of his work surrendered himself to the higher power, whose might must be kept in mind and never lost sight of. How then can he be elated? He should not even care for the result of his actions. Then alone the karma becomes unselfish. The disciple asks, how can unerring rectitude be ensured for the worker? Sri Bhagavan replied, if he has surrendered himself to God or to Guru, the power to which he had surrendered will take him on the right course. The worker need not no longer concern himself about the rectitude or otherwise of the course. The doubt will arise only if he fails to obey the master in all details. The disciple said, is there not any power on earth which can bestow grace on its devotees so that they may grow strong to work for the country and gain Swaraj? Sri Maharshi remained silent. Then he later said, signified that such was the case. The disciple said, is not the tapasya of the ancient Mahatmas of the land available for the benefit of its present-day inheritors? Sri Bhagavan replied, it is, but the fact must not be overlooked that no one can claim to be the sole beneficiary. The benefits are shared by all alike. After a pause, is it without such saving grace that the present awakening has come into being? After a short pause, J.B. said, Sri Rajendra Prasad is such a noble and selfless worker for the country that he has sacrificed a very lucrative career for this work. The country needs him, and yet he is not in good health and is always weak and ailing. Why should there be such cruelty to such a noble son of the country? Sri Maharshi simply smiled, a benign smile. The initial question was, how is the mind to be steadily kept right? What is the right state of the mind? It is one that it causes no suffering. It is one that is inward turned. It is one that has full recognition of what the truth is. It is one that does not entertain ignorance. It is one in which the mind is steadily in that which has just been described. Sri Bhagavan commenced his answer. All living beings are aware of their surroundings, and therefore intellect must be surmised in all of them. By what power do all living beings know or are aware, regardless of their bodies? They know, they are aware. By what light do they know? By what power? At the same time, there is a difference between the intellect of man and that of other animals, because man not only sees the world as it is and acts accordingly, but it also seeks fulfillment of desires and is not satisfied with the existing state of affairs. The purpose in him saying such is to turn the seeker's mind inward in the right direction, and not so much to discuss whether animals have the same awareness or different awareness, whether the animals would agree with the explanation or not. The point is that there's a dissatisfaction with the existing state of affairs. In other words, his present experience for a person, even though his mind or intellect may be interacting with that which is sensed in a perfectly fine manner. In his attempt to fulfill his desires, he extends his vision far and wide, and yet he turns away dissatisfied. Desires and the fulfillment of desires does not yield peace or happiness. In ignorance, one thinks what is necessary to be happy is a change of the outer circumstances. But that is not the case. In his attempt to fulfill his desires, he extends his vision far and wide, and yet he turns away dissatisfied because the inclination to search for happiness is rooted in something quite deep. Something not of a sensory character. searching externally in this manner, fulfilling desires, he turns away dissatisfied. He now begins to think and reason. How does he begin to think and reason? He recognizes that he's been consistently desiring happiness, and that happiness cannot be supplied to him, but must come from him himself. In this way he thinks, he reasons. What is the cause and what is the nature of happiness? He recognizes that he won't be happy by anything of an impermanent nature, that the happiness he seeks is permanent. The desire for permanency of happiness and of peace bespeaks such permanency in his own nature. When there is this recognition, the desire for happiness becomes the desire for self-realization, for the happiness that is sought, and that permanently so, is the very nature of his existence, which always is. Therefore he seeks to find and regain his own nature, that is the self. The quest for the self is the actual or the real the search for happiness is in reality the search for one's own self. And it is one's own self that is the happiness, that is the eternal. Therefore he seeks to find and regain in his own nature, that is his self. That found, all is found. The realization of the self leaves no further peace or happiness to be desired, leaves no other wisdom to be known. That found, all is found. Such inward seeking is this path to be gained by man's intellect. The intellect itself realizes after continuous practice that it is enabled by some higher power to function. The discrimination utilized in spirituality implies the existence of an intellect. If we discern or discriminate what is the nature of the intellect will lose its form as such, and something of a transcendent nature alone will remain. That which is transcendent is consciousness. The intellect itself realizes after continuous practice that it is enabled by some higher power to function. What is the power that enables you to discriminate? What is the power that manifests as the discrimination itself? By what power do you listen, reflect, and meditate? The intellect is enabled by some higher power to function. It cannot itself reach that power. Meaning that in the attempt to do so, it would disappear, the consciousness alone remaining. So it ceases to function after a certain stage. It cannot reach beyond itself. Something else illumines or knows. That is that consciousness. When it thus ceases to function, the supreme power is still left there, all alone. That is realization. That is the finality. That is the goal. The power by which you realize is the realization itself. The realization that lies beyond the mind or intellect is the finality. That is the goal. So point your mind in the direction of that. What can be dissolved will be dissolved. What remains forever afterwards is actually the abiding reality now and always. More when we again meet. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Shanti, Shanti.